delighted to be talking to the wonderful and talented Hubert Joly. Is a longtime friend of the family and an all-around great human. You guys will get to know that as well as I do throughout this conversation. So to build his formal introduction, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the important details about his greatness, Hubert Joly is the former chairman and chief executive officer of Best Buy, and he is now a senior lecturer at the Harvard Business School. He is also a member of the board of directors of Johnson & Johnson and the Ralph Lauren Corporation, a member of the International Advisory Board of HEC Paris, and a trustee of the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Hubert has been recognized as one of the top 100 CEOs in the world by the Harvard Business Review, one of the top 30 CEOs in the world by Barron's, and one of the top 10 CEOs in the US by Glassdoor. During his time at Best Buy, he and his team rebuilt the company into one of the nation's favorite employers, a sustainable leader and an innovator, dramatically increasing customer satisfaction and growing the company's stock price tenfold. His greatest achievement, however, and this is an important one, may have been to make himself dispensable. He decided to step down as CEO in 2019 and as executive chairman in 2020 and pass the baton to the next generation of new leaders. Hubert's purpose in life is to make a positive impact on the people around him and use the platform he has to make a positive difference in the world. In addition to serving on boards, he now spends most of his time as a lecturer at Harvard Business School and supporting other leaders seeking to become the best versions of themselves and to lead with purpose in humanity. He is actively invested in efforts to advance meaningful diversity and inclusion as well. So with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Hubert Joly. Thank you for being here.
Kelly, I so look forward to our conversation. And for everyone, you understand the hierarchy, right? Kelly is a professor of marketing. I'm a senior lecturer of marketing. There's a huge difference between the two. So Kelly, I look up to you and thank you so much for helping me last year with your advice on how to get off to a reasonably good start at Harvard Business School. Thank you.
It was certainly an honor to have such a Zoom call with such a luminary asking my advice on teaching insights. I'm about to get your advice on being a chief executive officer and a chairman, because you have tons of insights to share. Now, so I've read Hubert's book twice. If anyone, I know only 50 copies were given away, which is a travesty, but the good news is, Hubert, tell us about the wonderful cause that your royalties are going to.
Oh, yes. So all of my royalties go to help fund the Best Buy Teen Tech Centers. So this is a program we studied when I was at Best Buy. We have about 50 across the country. We'll have 100. This is for disadvantaged teenagers in underserved communities to help them access technology skills and then build a path to college and or a job. And so so if you're in doubt about buying the book, think about this. You could potentially use the book to help stabilize your wobbly table and help a few kids. So how wrong would that be to do this? So just go ahead and
just go ahead and buy the book, right? I've got the hardcover and I've got the audiobook. So I'm giving lots to the children and I feel great about it. All right. So something that you'll learn more about if you get the book, but we'll have Hubert give us a bit of a teaser. Now, when you took over Best Buy, things were not looking good. In fact, you have a long history of turnarounds. Tell us a little bit about what it was like and why you accepted that position.
So we have to rewind. It's 2012. At the time, Kelly, I think many of us remember, right? Everybody thought Best Buy was going to die. There was zero buy recommendation on the stock. And one day I get a call from my good friend, Jim Citrian, who's a senior partner at Spencer Stewart, his old friend of mine. He says, talks to me about this job. And I said, Jim, you're crazy, right? I'm not a retailer. And this place, which used to be great, is now a mess. So why are you calling me? And he said, well, they're not looking for a retailer. They're looking for somebody who can bring a fresh perspective. And you're a turnaround guy, so you'd be great. So do me a favor. You have to study. Okay, so everything that Jim tells me is like your father, Kelly. Everything that Marshall tells me, I do. And so I studied and I found two things. One is the world needed Best Buy. Right? Because as customers, for some of our purchases of electronics, it's actually helpful to be able to touch, see, and feel the products and ask questions. And importantly, the vendors, the tech companies, the Apples and Microsoft and Samsung and Sony needed Best Buy because they needed a place where to showcase the fruit of their billions of dollars of R&D investment. So nothing wrong with the sector. or even though the previous management team was complaining about headwinds, right? We have price deflation, the move to online, so they were complaining. And talking about headwinds, imagine for a second that we would have called Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook and asked them, how's the wind where you're sailing? I said, oh my God, Hubert, the wind, we love the wind. So, the wind was not the problem, we were the problem. What I found in the due diligence is that all of our problems were self-inflicted, right? Our prices were not competitive. The online shopping experience was horrendous. The speed of shipping was terrible. The quality of service in the stores, had really gone down. Our cost structure was bloated. So good news with all of these is that I couldn't blame Jeff about them, right? And so we could correct them. And so that convinced me to, apply for the job. I told the board, I'd love to have this job. This is what I would do. And on my birthday, they actually offered me the job.
Wow. There you go. So within just a few years, you were really able to turn the company around, which is so impressive. So tell us a little bit about what you think allowed for that. What allowed that turnaround to be so successful?
Yeah, and there was two phases, where the first phase was really the turnaround, and we called it Renew Blue. And at the time, the advice I was getting from investors and analysts was cut, cut, cut. The traditional formula of turnarounds: close stores, fire a lot of people. And I looked, and all of the stores were profitable, so I didn't know the purpose of closing profitable stores. And in my book, people are usually the source of the solutions, not the problem. And so our approach was a very human-centric approach. And so it started with people, listening to the frontliners. I spent my first week on the job working in a store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, just 2 hours north of Minneapolis, listening to the frontliners, asking them what's working, what's not working, what do you need? And they knew. So my job was easy: make notes and then go back to the ranch and to figure out how to do these things. And they gave me such good advice. The other aspect of studying with people is, don't tell Senator McCarthy, I'm a bit of a Maoist. I believe that fish rot from the head. Right? And so making sure we had the right team at the top. And then it was finishing with people. So instead of starting with headcount reduction, one of the things I learned from a client when I was at McKinsey was, turnaround, start with growing revenue, because it's amazing what revenue growth can do. And in terms of cost reduction, focus first on non-salary expenses, which is all of the element of the cost structures that have nothing to do with people. As an example, at Best Buy, we sell a lot of TVs, right? They're large, they're thin, so they break. We would break $200 million worth of TVs every year, but we sell a lot of them, right? Yeah. And so imagine if you can, work with the vendors to improve packaging, improve design, improve the flow of the product, tell the customers how to handle the TVs. If you can cut that number by 50%, good for the customer, because 0% of customers want to buy a broken TV. Yeah. Good for the P&L. And if you're going to go to headcount reduction, there's better ways to handle that. Maybe redeploy people or treat them on the way out as well as on the way in. And then finally, of that human-centric approach. So in physics, we learned that energy is a finite quantity, right? You're a behavioral scientist, right? Do you believe that we can create energy?
No. Is that the right answer?
No, we can. In a human organization, we can. As leaders, of course, right? I should have made my question clearer.
You're kind.
Our role as leaders is, in fact, it's not so much to come up with the right answer. That part is easy. Is to create an environment where you can unleash human magic,
right?
Create energy. So how do you do this? It's by co-creating the plan as opposed to telling people what to do. It's getting going. It's celebrating early wins. It's being transparent. If something is not working, you say, oh, this one didn't work out quite as intended. Let's go back and fix that. And so that was the much more than any brilliant thought from a strategic standpoint. It was that aspect. And the focus, by the way, talking about strategy, it's a little bit like Lou Gerstner when he joined IBM in 1992. He said the last thing that IBM needs at this point is a vision. We need execution. It was the same at Best Buy. We had to fix what was broken. And that took us about 3 years. And you're never done, right? But it was much better. And that's when we shifted to the second phase, which we called building the new blue. And that's where we got into purpose and really changing the culture and the way the organization worked. But that first phase was critical to gain us the right to be in that second phase afterwards.
Sure. Now, speaking of purpose, in your new book, The Heart of Business, which, like I said, is excellent, you outline the importance of leading with purpose and humanity. So tell us a little bit more about that philosophy.
Yeah, and so, we have to step back here because last year, I don't know about you guys, but, I'm the eternal optimist, but I had to slow down and say, look, whatever we're doing is not working, right? We have this multifaceted crisis. We have a health crisis, of course, economic crisis, societal issues, racial issues, environmental threats, and geopolitical tensions. So whatever we have been doing is not working, right? At least not working for most people. And what's the definition of madness, right? Doing the same thing and hoping for a different outcome. And what have we been doing in the last 50 years? I think it's been a business world dominated. So in my FBI most wanted list, I have two people. One, Milton Friedman, shareholder primacy, and two, Bob McNamara, the model of scientific top-down management. These things are poisonous and they don't work. Mm-hmm. And so one of the convictions I have, and that's shared by many, is we need a refoundation of business. We need a new formula. And the philosophy that was behind the resurgence of Best Buy, is simple to express. It's the idea that at the heart of business, you have the idea of business pursuing a noble purpose, number one, putting people at the center, creating an environment where everybody can blossom and where you can unleash human magic, embracing all stakeholders, some kind of declaration of interdependence. And that's not just true for your CSR activities or your ESG program, but at the core, when you and I do marketing, I think increasingly when we define what we want to, what our brand wants to stand for, what our value proposition needs to encompass not just the customers, but society, the sustainability, the employees, and so forth. So embrace all stakeholders, refusing zero-sum gains, and then finally treating profit as an outcome, not the goal.
Right.
So now that philosophy is so easy to express, right? It took me 2 minutes. Very simple. So hard to do because it requires reinventing every aspect of management. So we can dig in any of these topics, but that's the idea of the heart of business. And what I'll put in the chat, by the way, for future use by people listening, I was sharing that with you. We have the first ever and only business electrocardiogram, right? So it's on the website. I'll put it in the chat, and it's 20 questions that can help you assess the health of the heart of your business. All, with 20 questions looking at, how people feel about work, what's the purpose of the company, what's the environment, leadership. And so it will help you maybe look at where you feel you're better, and then maybe look at areas where you'd like to improve it, and gives you a few pointers. So that's the first ever business electrocardiogram.
Very impressive. I'm excited to try it out myself. Yeah. So thinking about the noble purpose, and one thing I will say about the book that I love that's uncommon, and I like to think I've read a lot of nonfiction business books, my friend. But one thing I love about your book that distinguishes it from others, it is very philosophical. Like you cite a lot, you're very well read, and you have a very diverse background that you incorporate into your philosophy of business, which I just wanted to say, I really appreciated that. It
is the combination, the way the book is written, it's really, of course, there's a bit about the turnaround of Best Buy, but this is not the story of the turnaround. Right? There's a bit about my own leadership journey. And then there's this philosophy. And then I wanted the book not to be theoretical. So it's got a good foundation. But then the book is really written as a guide for everybody, every leader, and all of us are leaders, because at minimum we're leaders of our lives, right? Who is eager to move in that direction. So it's a very practical book. At the end of each chapter, as you've seen, there's questions that we can use to reflect on and try to move forward. A lot of very practical. So it's a practical guide. It's a playbook for the next era.
It's great. Well, I think we need that. We need the kind of high level philosophical insights and then distilled down into tactics we can actually make work for us. Yeah. And it does challenge you. Like it forced a lot of introspection in myself. I told you, I think I'm going to need to get an executive coach at the end of this, get myself, find my purpose. Now, speaking of not just my own personal purpose, but corporate purposes, do you really believe that businesses can be a force for good in this day and age?
They can and they need to, because I think we've had an era of shareholder activism. I think we have now an era of stakeholder activism. And so our employees want to work for, great companies. Customers really care about who they do business with. Society expects us to be a force for good. And shareholders, the letters that Larry Fink writes to us, public company CEOs every year, you talk to us about what is your purpose? What is your long-term strategy? His last letter this year was all about the environment and what we're doing to move forward. So it's from all angles. Now, we, as leaders, we have a choice. We can either resist that and see that as a, bother, as a, an impediment to doing real work, which is profit maximization. Or we can say, no, this is the new world. And so embrace it. And of course, I'm in the latter camp. And this idea of starting with a noble purpose is quite foundational. And I'll make it very concrete because every company on the planet now is busy writing their purpose. Right? It's making very fashionable. And so at Best Buy, once we had done the turnaround, we slowed down. Of course, we did a lot of marketing work, consumer research, segmentation, targeting, positioning, all that kind of good stuff. But we also, watched Simon Sinek's video on the why question. And then there was another moment. I want to take you through that before I get to the outcome. So every quarter we would get together as an executive team to work on our plans, our strategy, our progress, you name it. Everybody does that, right? But one time I asked every one of the executive team members to bring to the offsite a picture of themselves when they were little. Some really good, cute pictures, you can imagine, right? And then over dinner, we spend the evening sharing with each other our life story, okay? And what was really important in our life, what drives us in life, how we want to be remembered, what's our purpose in life. And we found two things that I think were transformational. One, all of these executives, self-included, are human beings. They're not just a CFO. They're really human beings. They're parents, their daughters, their sons. And with one or two exceptions, all of us had the same kind of purpose in life, doing something good for others, right? The golden rule, which I think is so universal. And that led us to step back and say, look, we're the executive team of Best Buy. So we have this platform. Why don't we use it to make it a force for good and build the kind of company we'd like to work for. So a company that employees love, customers love, the community loves, and shareholders love, right? All of this seems, could seem soft, but our share price went from 11 to 110, right? So this is real, guys.
Yeah.
And that led us, and this was a lot of work, this was multiple steps, to say, okay, so we're actually not a retailer. So Best Buy is not a retailer. We're a company that's in the business of enriching lives through technology by addressing key human needs. So of course, much more inspirational, at least to us.
Oh, yeah.
And then vastly expands the addressable market, because the market for retailing of consumer electronics in the US is about $250 billion. If you expand this to all of the ways you can help address human needs, it's more than $1 trillion, more than $1 trillion, right? And that got us to get into the healthcare space, helping aging seniors live in their home independently longer by putting sensors under their bed, their sofa, the kitchen, the bathroom, fall detection.
Right.
So that's a service that is very meaningful. Our in-home advisor program, where if your need is too complex, we'll come to you. So it's not retail, right? We'll come to you like a designer. And our aspiration is to become like your CIO, CTO for your home. So that was the work on purpose. But now, companies get stuck when they work on purpose in multiple places, or can get stuck in multiple places. One, the purpose is too abstract and it doesn't become the cornerstone of the strategy. So then it's meaningless. Or B, they do the work there, but then it's hard for everybody at the company to write themselves into that story. So let's imagine for a second, Kelly, that you and I go into a store in Nashville a few years ago, and we both work at Best Buy. We tell the associates in the store, we have some great news. We have a new purpose as a company. Our purpose now is going to be to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs. Of course, the associates in the store and the GM say, Hubert, we love you, but you're saying what? You want us to do what at 10 a.m. when we take our shift? So doing the work, and there's a lot of details on that in the book on how to allow everybody at the company to write themselves into that story, and how to create the environment where it's sustainable at scale. you have 100,000 employees doing magical things for customers and community and shareholders. So that's the journey. It's a lot of work. See the scars on my face? That's because it's hard.
Yeah. I will say the book provides some fantastic examples. You know, you touched on the one about elder care, where they have the sensors in the fridge to make sure people are feeding themselves enough and getting out of bed enough. And I thought, wow, that is like such a meaningful way to think about how technology can make our lives better.
Yes.
Yes, the book is full of good ones like that. So pivoting a little bit, you are a big advocate for diversity and inclusion, which a lot of us here at Vanderbilt are as well. And I know you put in a great deal of effort to bring some more diversity and inclusiveness onto your board. So can you talk a little bit about what that looked like at Best Buy?
Yeah, and so the starting point, so I'd always known that diversity matters, right? McKinsey has done a bunch of studies on that. They started with gender diversity, but then they expanded to racial and all forms of diversity. So intellectually, I knew that. And I think at Best Buy, quite quickly, half of my direct reports were actually women. And so I give credit to all of the women on the team for doing the important work. But then in 2016, I think it was, we were seeing the employee engagement scores really go up very nicely. But I was seeing quite significant differences across groups, in particular across race. So I did focus groups to better understand it. And the pain I heard and felt from the Black employees, our Black colleagues, was very significant, very different, order of magnitude different from any other group. And I use as an excuse the fact that I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in France, where there's racism, believe me, but different type, to want to learn. So I got a reverse mentor, actually spoke with her yesterday, Laura Gladney, to learn about the experience of our Black colleagues. I was encouraged by one of our board members also to go see and speak and listen to Melody Hobson, of course, she's now chair of Starbucks and on the board of JP Morgan. One of the things she told me, she gave me a lot of great advice, but one thing she told me is, you have to understand, you cannot be who you cannot see. It's so one of the things, not the other thing, but one of the things you need to focus on is the top of the house. And the board is actually so easy because there's only roughly 10 people on the board. So how hard can it be to get a diverse board, right? And so we had made progress with gender diversity on the board. We had like 40% of the board were women, but not so much on race diversity. So with the head of NomGov on our board, we told Hydrick and Struggle, look, we would like to get resumes of great Black candidates. So don't bother giving us resumes of non-Black candidates. If you believe that you will be unable to give us quality resumes of Black candidates, that's okay. We'll accept this. Except we'll work with another firm. That's okay. It's your choice. And we were able to recruit 3 amazing Black directors, including somebody who's a trustee now at Vanderbilt, the amazing Cindy Kent, a dear friend. I just saw her a few days ago. And that made a huge difference. And right after we did this, we organized an event on campus at our headquarters with a panel of our 3 new Black directors who were able to share their life story with our employees and so forth. So that made a big difference. That's not the only thing because otherwise if it's the only thing, it's too cosmetic. But it was in direct answer to your question. That was I felt that was important because then, what's happening since the murder of George Floyd, of course, the perceived importance of this has gone up through the roof, and now you see a phenomenon where boards are holding management teams accountable. So having a diverse board is so helpful from that standpoint. Even though if you guys are sitting on a board, don't rely on the Black directors on the board to raise diversity issues, right? Now that would be tokenization, right? No, all of us need to be involved in that journey.
That's great. So what are some other qualities that you feel are essential for leadership today specifically?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So because in that revolution, right? So because I think it's a revolution, we need to rethink leadership. The old model of leadership is, I think, last century, right? It's the leader who knows everything, who's a superhero, who's there to save the day. I know I was one of them, right? Who is driven by power, fame, glory, or money, unfortunately. And that doesn't work, right? People don't want to follow these people. So I think the new model, and the good news is there's many, many great leaders like that now. It's what I call purposeful leaders, right? So they're clear about their own purpose. So maybe something you need to work on, Kelly.
Yes, I know.
People then are curious about the purpose of people around them. And then are able to do the work to connect our individual purposes with the work and with the purpose of the company. So that's one first attribute. The second attribute or expectation is to be clear about your role. And our role as leaders, I think, is less about coming with the answer, but more to create the environment where everybody at the company can blossom. So it's a significant mind shift, which has all sorts of implications. The third attribute is be clear about your role, about who you serve. So I told the officers at Best Buy, if you're here to serve yourself or your boss or me as the CEO of the company, it's okay. I don't have a problem with that, as Alan Mulally would say, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. When Alan says that, it's not good.
It's not good.
Now, the other thing is you cannot work here. We're going to promote you to customer. And as a customer, we're going to take great care of you, but you can't work here. On the other hand, if you're here to, serve the people on the front line, then we're good. It's about integrity, because that's foundational. And then it's about being an authentic leader, being able to be vulnerable. And for many years, Kelly, I suffered from a disease, and your dad helped me get cured, right? Which was the quest for perfection. I thought I needed to be perfect, and that's wrong. The only way that you can build a really human team is by being vulnerable and be able to say, my name is Hubert and I need help. And so so that's a sea change, and that's hard work, right? To evolve, because so many of us were wired to be the old model. It's significant rewiring. And yes, getting a coach can be in my case, was incredibly impactful. In the case of, I think, Marshall Goldsmith, your dad, uses me in a commercial as the most improved, right? He shows the after, and it's most improved.
Yes, he's very proud. But you did the hard work. It's impressive.
Thank you.
So now, thinking about how those qualities of a good leader have evolved, like tactically as a CEO, how do you implement those changes in your leadership role?
So there's many things. One is being clear. So one of the things is being clear about what you yourself are trying to get better at, right? And that's transformative. So standing in front of your team and say, these are the 3 things I'm trying to get better at.
Right.
And I'm going to follow up with you and ask for your advice. And what's fabulous then is if everybody does this, so Kelly, if we're on the same team, I'll tell you the 3 things I'm working on and ask you for advice. And then you're better than me, so you're only working on 2 things. You say, these are the 2 things I'm working on. Do you have any advice for me? So we help each other. The other thing is, shifting the mind from doing all of the work on strategy and working more on the environment. One of the things we did that was really transformational was work on our team effectiveness. So we had done a great work, I think, on having A players on the team. But there's a big difference between having A players on the team and the team being an A team. And so we did a lot of work on that. Every quarter, we would spend a day working on our team effectiveness, getting to know each other, our different leadership style. A key question that was quite impactful was asking people on my team, what's your primary team? Is your primary team to lead your direct reports in your organization, or is it to be part of the overall team? And I remember that Mike Mohan, who later became the president of the company, at one of these events said, I now feel I need to make the corporate team my primary team to help really with the overall transformation. Discussions around decision-making. So in the second phase of the journey, in the first phase, I had spent a lot of time making decisions myself. We're going to match prices, we're going to partner with Samsung, we're going to exit Europe, all of these things. But in the second phase, if we wanted to accelerate our growth, I couldn't be a bottleneck. So I told the team, look, there's only a handful of decisions I'm responsible for, right? So the overall strategy, who's on the team, the culture, big investment decision. That's it.
Yeah.
Let's figure out the other decisions, who's in charge of them. Let's see how far down we can push them. And let's see how we make these decisions. Because before, one of the things that was slowing us down is that if a senior executive would raise their eyebrow and say, "Oh, I wouldn't do it this way. I'm not sure I would do that. I don't agree," it would stop us. And we said, no, 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 that's not our role as senior executives, right? Let's imagine Jason is in charge of the strategy for the mobile phone department. So Jason will decide, who he's going to consult for the decision. And our role, if we're on that list, is to provide the best possible input to Jason, which is much harder than raising eyebrows.
Yeah.
And so these are the kind of things. And working on in the book I call the 5 ingredients of I'm French, so I can provide a recipe, right?
That's
5
good.
ingredients of unleashing human magic, which is really working on the humanity of the organization and what it's like to work at the company. So these are the things that we worked on.
I love it. Now, hearing you talk about this reminded me of a story from the book about you seeing a green marker on the conveyor belt and taking a picture of it. Will you tell that story? Because it's hilarious.
Yes, and I'm distracted a bit because I see Kimberly in the chat who had a bad experience at Best Buy. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to copy everything you're saying, Kimberly. And even though I don't no longer work at the company, I would want to make sure that we take care of you, right? Because it's so important. So forgive me for doing customer service.
So while he's engaged in customer service, by the way, is France playing? Who's playing soccer right now that we needed to update you on? Portugal?
No, I wasn't able to copy. So maybe if your team can send me the comments, or I'll take a screenshot. Yeah. So if somebody has the score for France-Portugal, you can tell me. Okay, so I take a screenshot.
That's leadership in action. That's great to see.
So on the green marker.
Yes. So
I was visiting a return center in Kentucky, and there's a city in Kentucky that's the locals call it Louisville. Correction, it's called Louisville, but the locals call it Louisville, right? Including Senator McConnell. But on a conveyor belt, I saw a green marker that had been returned from a store. As you know, at Best Buy, you buy something, you can return it during a certain window. And you can imagine the cost of returning the marker to the return center and what we were going to do with it, like nothing. So that led us to establish a new policy. And if you have 10 minutes, now I'll read to you the entire policy. So here it is. We're going to stop doing anything that's either crazy, goofy, or stupid. Period. End of policy.
Good policy.
And I gave, the image was, I wanted every one of the associates at the company to feel that they had the baton of a field marshal in their backpack and be empowered to do what's right. And at another event, head of HR and head of store, Kemi Scarlett, said, in retail, we use the phrase SOP, standard operating procedure. And even though she was in charge of stores, she said, no. SOP doesn't stand for standard operating procedure. It stands for service over policy. Right? And it's really about empowering human beings to do great things for other human beings.
That's great. Well, it is. We've now hit the 2:35 mark. So we are going to be moving on to questions that were pre-submitted. And then I will also, while you're answering the next one, I will peek in the Q&A to see if we've got any that have come in more recently. So in terms of the pre-submitted questions, this is a good one. And because we haven't talked much about the pandemic, we're like directly addressing the pandemic and all the uncertainty that has ushered into how business is done. So this question pertains to that. What do you think is the most difficult part of getting teams in different countries to work together and exchange best practices to improve their overall performance, especially after the pandemic has hindered international travel?
Yeah, so this pandemic, we've seen all sorts of very painful things, very extraordinary things, but there's a challenge of, and that's our good friend Jim Citrin has written this book, Leading from a Distance, or Leading at a Distance. It's harder, right? And in particular, onboarding new team members is particularly hard. And if the idea of purposeful leadership is about connecting with people at a more human level, it's very tempting to just go from one Zoom meeting to the next and being very task oriented without taking the time to get to know people. And so I think what we've certainly been reminded of during the pandemic is the humanity of our colleagues, right? And on Zoom, you can see, their spouses, their children, their dogs, their cats, their Wi-Fi problems. Or if it's frontline workers, we can see their health challenges. Taking the subway in New York was not great during the pandemic. And so we've rediscovered the humanity of our coworkers, of our colleagues. And so leading with empathy has become so critical. And so there's many ways that, and I didn't write the book on leading at a distance, or my colleague at Harvard, Sedal Nidi, has written a great book, Remote Work Revolution. So these are great sources, but I've seen, leaders get out of their way. So I know my successor at Best Buy, Corey, every week she connects with every one of her team members one-on-one to check in with them. So outside almost any, business agenda, then there may be business being discussed in this meeting, but making sure she connects with them. And of course, the beauty of Zoom is she was able to transport herself around the world, including in our China office where we're sourcing, but prioritizing leading from a place of humanity and empathy. All of the work on mental health, is so important. There's another great book that was published earlier last month, Anxiety at Work by Adrian Bostic and Chester. His last name escapes me for a second, but these are really important topics. And by the way, if you're feeling that you're struggling during these times, right, you're not the only one. Finding a way to take care of yourself and looking for help is really important. So I would emphasize this empathy and attention to the people who are in our care, right? I think that's an important, I like that phrase, I got it from a friend. The people who are in our care, right? We're really responsible for them. And for me, the biggest leadership, Chester Elton is his name, the biggest leadership lesson is that while historically we've been trained to lead with our brain, now we need to lead with all of our body parts, right? Of course, the head, but also the heart, the soul, the guts, the ears, the eyes. And that's a very significant transformation.
That is a significant transformation. It ties into something else you talk about in the book. I love that you kind of quote Brene Brown and talk about vulnerability, and you talk about authenticity and how that's a real shift. And you've touched on that in this discussion, from the way leadership used to be construed to how it's more effective now by incorporating the heart with the brain and the guts and all the other stuff. I like that a lot. All right. So another question, you battled somewhat head to head with Amazon while at Best Buy. Do you believe in breaking up Amazon because of its monopolistic characteristics should be done for the betterment of the economy?
So it's an interesting conversation, and we have a new FTC leader who's got a significant background in antitrust. I don't know whether these large companies need to be broken up. What seems to be clear to me is that antitrust legislation dates back to a completely different environment, right? And so part of the work is not just going to be in the FTC, but also in Congress to update our laws, because the laws were developed to protect the consumers, right? And so a lot of these services, whether it's Amazon or Facebook, are free.
Yeah. So
by definition, you could say, well, therefore it's good. Well, it's actually more complicated than this, because there's other aspects of the business, how Amazon, some of the questions that are being asked is sometimes Amazon will lower prices even when they don't have any inventory, right? So you could say, well, that's good for the customers because it's driving prices down. Well, except it may hurt other competitors, right? So,
right.
I've not done the case on Amazon and so forth, but I think that these are I have a curious mind. So I love interesting questions. And I think that there's momentum to review these. These are extraordinary companies, right? They've been incredibly successful. So you have to salute them. They also reach a size that's significant. Another question is, so antitrust from an acquisition standpoint, I've been Hart-Scott-Rodino, for those of us who follow if the company that's acquired is below a certain size, you don't get a look.
Hmm.
But if Apple keeps buying small companies, or Facebook, that's the acquisition, right? They're acquiring small companies to prevent competition from happening. It never gets reviewed. So my sense is we need to take a fresh look at the competitive dynamics of these markets, study the facts, look at what statute needs to be updated so that we have something that's contemporary. And then, Jeff knows that at some point, he knew he was going to attract, scrutiny when you become that big. And
sure.
So I think there's no surprise here that it's getting scrutiny, of course.
Yeah. Very interesting perspective. All right. This is another one that I think is highly relevant, in the wake, hopefully, knock on wood, in the wake of the pandemic. What changes to your organization's hiring practices are resulting from the current tightness in the labor market? Are you hiring younger part-time workers? Do you envision labor tightness to worsen or improve over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so it's such an important phenomenon. I was reading government data that shows that in retail, there's last number, I forgot the exact number, but maybe 500,000, 600,000 people in April who left employment in retail, even though the economy is coming back, because these are people who are being underpaid at some retailers, or the working conditions are not great. And so that's very interesting because it's in line with this idea of stakeholder capitalism. The companies, including Amazon, were obsessed about customers, and in marketing, the whole thing was about what are the customer needs and how do we meet the customer needs. And in the stakeholder era, the employees are a very important group of stakeholders. And so you can do equally important work on employee value proposition. Of course, it has to do with the pay. And so many companies like Walmart and Target and Best Buy have increased starting wages to $15 per hour, and plus benefits and so forth. But it's also the work environment and the skills you can acquire and the ability to advance and how you're going to be treated and so forth. So it's interesting that to continue to talk about Jeff Bezos, in his last shareholder letter, he said, we've been obsessed about becoming Earth's most extraordinary company from a customer standpoint. I think we need to do the same from an employee standpoint. Yeah. And so it's back to this idea that we need to embrace all of the stakeholders in a unified fashion. And companies that ignore the market tightness and the fact that that employees have a choice, and they've reflected during the pandemic about what's important to them. If we ignore, you can ignore this, but at your own peril, in the same way that if you ignore the customers, it's going to be at your own peril. So I think it's a very important shift. So we'll see companies put a lot more emphasis on that.
Yeah, I think that's important. Now, this is a question, you touched on it a little bit. This is one that just came in while you were talking. What, if any, external advice did you seek in the Best Buy transformation?
Oh, external advice all the time. And it would be even more true today, right? Because let's admit that the challenges we're being faced with today, there's no playbook. Maybe, Kelly, you had a playbook at the time of the pandemic, right? Or maybe you have a playbook for back to the office, or you had a playbook on how to deal with a world where companies need to weigh in increasingly on societal matters. There's no playbook for these things.
Right.
And so I think it's Satya Nadella who said that leaders need to evolve from the know-it-all to the learn-it-all. See leaders at the beginning of the pandemic who said, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and that's what we're going to do to find out. And if you're a retailer and you're dealing with that, you're probably going to reach out, you're a Target or Best Buy in Minneapolis, you're going to reach out to Mayo Clinic and say, how should we think about this? How serious is this? You're going to reach out to other companies. How are you dealing with sanitation? How do you decide to open your stores? And so I keep quoting other people because credit should go where credit is due. Clark Murphy, the CEO of Russell Reynolds, recently was talking to me about how we have focused historically on IQ and then EQ. He shared with me the importance of LQ, the learning quotient. So for leaders, the ability to learn and take advice, work with their team, right? Because the leader is not there to have all of the answers, but to create the environment where we can create the answers. So I think that's a huge step. And my most frequently used phrase is, my name is Hubert, I need help.
I like that. Well, I'm going to add on to this question. So in the book, you talk about your wonderful wife, Atans, who is
Yeah.
also a leadership expert. So what specifically have you learned from her?
Oh my God, how much time do you have? How much time do you have? I think it's and we're talking about this because she's working on our next book project, and we're meeting with an agent this morning. And the agent was asking us about, what's unique in your thinking and our coaching. And it's really the humanity side, the human side. And many leaders, self included, for many, many years, we had our head cut off from the rest of our body. And we were relying on our left brain, ignoring our right brain. And so it's back to this idea of leading with all of our body parts. And really doing the work on what are the way she talks about it, what are the mind traps that are holding us back? And how can we free ourselves up? And she's amazing at this. She's like a magician. So I'm watching her because we coach clients together. And so when she does that, and maybe the very specific thing that I would highlight is while in the new CEO workshop we do at HBS, we ask the new CEOs to write their retirement speech. I did this when I attended the program in 2008, and I'm now a member of the faculty there. I think her question is even better. It's write down your eulogy. What do you want people to say on that day? And my friend John Donahoe, the CEO of Nike, he wrote down his retirement speech when he graduated from school, and he always kept it. And every year he goes back to it, right? So it's really this question of what kind of a leader do I want to be? What are going to be my values, my guiding principles? And how can I try to become the leader I'm meant to be? And that's where Hortense is a magician. So anybody on this call who need help with unlocking themselves and becoming the best version of themselves, write to me and I'll connect you with Hortense.
She is fantastic. And her first book is Aligned, correct? That's the name? Yes.
Her first book is Aligned, and the provisional title for her second book is Unlocked.
Ooh, fantastic. Well, you're going to have to let me know when that drops, and I will get that too. Yeah. All right. So this is another one that people have written in. Clearly, people have been clicking on your website about the electrocardiogram. If there are multiple areas to improve in your business electrocardiogram results, which are the most important to start with first? You, your company, your team, or your leadership?
So I love the question and the idea of focusing on one thing, maybe, because it's one of the things I've learned in skill building is you can only do one thing at a time. So with my tennis pro, for the last 10 years, we've been working on my forehand, Kelly. So I think the foundational piece is yourself, right? It's leadership from the inside out. So becoming clear about who you are and who you want to be as an individual, that's truly foundational. Now, at the same time, when I joined Best Buy, because I think the answer to your question is probably a little bit dependent on the circumstances, so it's situational. When I joined Best Buy in 2012, the ship was sinking. The previous team had been working on rewriting the values of the company, and they were working on culture and leadership behaviors. And I decided to stop that, even though I'm a big believer in leadership, right? Because, so one of the things I learned at McKinsey is that you can categorize levers into three categories. The direct levers, you make sure our prices are competitive, we have the right products, the service level is good. There's indirect levers, which is organization, incentives, structure, and then contextual levers, which are the culture, the values, and so forth. The latter is much more powerful, but it takes more time to take effect. So in the early stages of our turnaround, we had to take act upon the direct levers, price matching Amazon, investing online, our supply chain, and so forth. And I just had to pick a team and say, we're going to mobilize around this. And the way we changed behaviors was by changing behaviors, right? We formed the culture and the values by just getting into the game and getting things done, building the momentum, building the confidence. So I think in theory, if you had the time, you would take each part of my book in sequence, but sometimes, you have to adapt because it's a little bit situational.
Okay, I think that makes sense. All right, so we have time for one and a half more questions. I'm going to start with this one. How do companies make sure that their purpose and that make sure that basically that they're using their platform for good and it's not just performative, that they're actually doing good?
Yeah, as opposed to just talking about it.
Yeah, that they're actually making a difference, I think.
They're making a difference. That's where I think, in this era of transparency and stakeholder activism, it's like always, right? If you believe you can fool all of the people all of the time, good luck, right? It's not working and it's not worth it, right? And so I think that this is a better life if you really go for it. But I like going back to that evening with the executive team where it started from us, right? And said, no, this is important. We're going to do it right. We're going to build a company that employees and customers and community and shareholders absolutely love. So that's the commitment. Now, boards have a role to play. If you're on a board and you see a company that's not behaving, then you have to call it out, frankly. Then investors and rating agencies, and of course the media now will call it out. So the question for me, when I listen to leaders, for me the debate is over of whether this is the right direction or not. I think wholeheartedly, vast majority of people embrace this. The question is not whether, but it's how. This is really hard. I see so many teams, well-intentioned, so they write down their purpose, but then they get stuck, as we discussed earlier. And so that's why I wrote this book as a very practical guide on how to tackle these different things, and for the benefit of all of us leaders who are on this journey to try to move in that direction. And so when you see discrepancy, it can come from either two things: either people still learning, or sometimes people take a defensive stance because they are afraid, right? And that's the last thing I would say is don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid to do good, people. That's great. I like that. Now, the last question, actually, I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna throw in one of my own questions as the last question. So I have taught marketing research, or quantitative methods for marketing decision making is the official title, for 12 years. And so I'm a big believer in data. I'm a behavioral scientist. I spend a lot of time with big fat Excel files. So in your book, though, you talk about how you too used to be just strictly governed by the numbers, but now you've had a bit of a metamorphosis in terms of your decision making. So in the last 3 minutes, if you could educate me, so you can help me out by learning, when do you shift away from data? How do you shift away from data? And what do you shift to? Where does the information come from?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's one is, if you're in charge of a decision, you need data, right? Data are good. There's a question about where you get the data.
Okay.
And one of the executives at Best Buy told me early on is that you don't expect that you'll be able to lead the company looking at spreadsheets in your office, because spreadsheets don't tell the reality. Right. And so that was Sherry Bernard. She told me, you're going to need to go out, spend time in stores, listening to the frontliners, be a customer yourself, because that's why I spent the first week on the job working in a store. Now, you could say, from a statistical standpoint, Hubert, how stupid are you? That's one store out of 1,000, right? So, how wrong could you be? But chances are that, what I was seeing, it was not store specific. The fact that, the website was not working was not store specific. So while data, I love data and I'm good with data, I think the idea of MBWA, management by walking around and being on the front line. So I think it's General Patton who said, you cannot push a noodle, you have to pull a noodle. Now, I'm not saying Best Buy is a noodle, but you know what I'm saying, right? You have to lead from the front. But then the other thing, which was a journey for me, is that I should not assume that I'm in charge of the decision. I may be tempted to have a point of view on everything, right? On how we should price this, what should be our return policy, what should be our services strategy. I mean, on everything. I'm hardworking, and I've got good gray cells from my parents, but I have to slow down. And I think in this great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
The classic.
There's the list of the 20 quirks of successful people. When I started to work with Marshall, I had 13 out of the 20 quirks. One of them is adding too much value. And so I had to slow down and say, no, this is not for me to solve this. let's make sure we have the right environment for somebody else, Jason or Mary, to actually solve this. And so these are the two things I would say. But at the same time, I look up to you because good data are going to be helpful, and facts can be our friends, right? So same way that if I had listened to just the opinions of people about how to turn around Best Buy, it would have closed stores and fired a lot of people. It would have been wrong. So data can be our friends.
Okay. We don't have to give up on data just yet. We're just going to enrich our perspective. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Hubert, for always being so wonderful. Thank you to the ON community.